The desert night was still until a thunderous gunshot shattered its silence, scattering crows into the blood-red sky. The narrator spoke of Thomas Kane, a rugged outlaw, his revolver smoking, his breath ragged, eyes haunted by betrayal. He whispered his brother's name, Samuel, the same kin who once saved him as boys, now the same man whose treachery cut deeper than any blade. The wind clawed through the abandoned ranch, carrying with it the echo of Samuel's laughter, mocking from the distance. Thomas muttered, "Blood's meant to bind, but his betrayal makes him a stranger." His hands trembled, not from fear but from rage boiling under the surface. A lantern swayed in the breeze, casting long shadows across the dust and ruin, as if ghosts of their past hovered. Every creak of wood and howl of wind whispered danger. The story began not with hope, but with a man crushed by kinship's cruelest wound. The morning sun rose cold, casting pale light over cracked desert earth as Thomas saddled his weary horse. He whispered, "Family's the cruelest wound." The narrator spoke of how Samuel, once protector, had turned traitor, stripping Thomas of trust and home. The ranch's ruins smoldered faintly, ash mixing with sand. He carried not only his revolver, but the crushing weight of bloodlines broken. The horizon offered no peace, only roads leading to revenge or ruin. He spat into the dirt, a sign of bitterness too old to hide. The narrator reminded the audience that Thomas had no law to guide him, no friend at his side, save for the fading voice of a mentor's wisdom long ago. Every step forward was a march toward the stranger his brother had become, yet the pull of vengeance made retreat impossible. By midday, Thomas rode into a town where shutters slammed and whispers filled the streets. "That's Kane," a woman murmured, her voice sharp with fear. Children darted inside doorways, leaving dust clouds where they stood. The narrator explained how Samuel's lies had poisoned Thomas's name, branding him a villain in towns that once welcomed him. His boots hit the dirt as he dismounted, eyes scanning faces that refused to meet his. He muttered, "A man betrayed by blood carries no friends." The saloon doors creaked open, and the stench of whiskey poured out. The narrator set the tone. Thomas had entered enemy ground where kin had twisted truth into a noose. His heart pounded not from guilt, but from the weight of strangers wearing familiar faces. Inside the saloon, silence dropped like a guillotine as Thomas entered. Cards froze mid-game, mugs half raised, eyes fixed on the outlaw. The narrator described the smell of stale whiskey and sweat clinging to the air. The bartender muttered, "Kane, you ain't welcome." Thomas's eyes scanned the room, jaw set, his revolver resting heavy at his side. Once, these men were neighbors and drinking partners. Now they were strangers clothed in suspicion. He spoke, "I don't seek trouble, just answers." The narrator revealed the tension. Samuel had poisoned more than blood, he had poisoned loyalty itself. Every tick of the clock above the bar felt like a drumbeat to violence. The bartender's hand twitched near the shotgun under the counter, but Thomas's glare froze him. The narrator explained that betrayal turned every room into a battlefield before a bullet was fired. Thomas recalled his brother's words, promises once made under starlit skies, now shattered. "Samuel ain't my kin no more," he whispered, though the words cut him deeper than steel. The room stayed silent, but hatred thickened the air. The narrator warned that Thomas's journey had only begun, a journey where each step pulled him deeper into shadows Samuel cast. Outside, a dog howled, breaking the stillness, an omen for blood yet to come. The town's silence broke when Sheriff Hale stepped into the street, boots striking hard against the dirt. The narrator explained that Hale had once been hailed as a protector, but now he served Samuel's will, wearing law like a mask for greed. Thomas squared his shoulders, eyes fixed on Hale, his heart heavy with recognition that the law was no shield here. "Kane," the sheriff said, "men like you never change." Thomas replied, voice calm but laced with bitterness, "Men like me are made by betrayal." The townsfolk watched from behind shutters, torn between fear and curiosity. The narrator revealed that Samuel's reach ran deeper than blood. He had corrupted law itself. Each word between Thomas and Hale carried the weight of bullets unsent. Hale's smirk said enough. Justice here was for sale, and Samuel had bought it dearly. The narrator spoke of the tension between the outlaw and the lawman, as Hale circled Thomas like a wolf around wounded prey. Hale's voice carried mockery. "You've got no home, no name, nothing but dust and regret." Thomas clenched his jaw, eyes never leaving Hale's. He replied, "I've got the truth, and that burns hotter than your lies." The narrator described how whispers rose from the saloon, men emboldened by Hale's authority. Every pair of eyes marked Thomas not as a victim, but as a villain. Dust swirled at their boots, the air thick with violence yet restrained. The past clung to Thomas, while Samuel's lies draped him like a noose, waiting for the sheriff to tighten it. A voice broke the standoff, young and brash, calling from the saloon's porch. It was Eli Turner, a sidekick barely tested by the world, rushing forward with reckless fire in his eyes. The narrator explained how Eli admired Thomas, seeing him as a symbol of defiance against corruption. Eli shouted, "They fear you because you stand alone against their lies." Thomas turned sharply, his voice low and sharp, "This ain't your fight, boy." The crowd murmured, tension shifting as Eli's boldness cut through fear. Hale sneered, "Another fool chasing ghosts." The narrator set the stage for trouble. Innocence was no shield in a land where betrayal reigned. The narrator described Eli's naive courage, clashing with Thomas's bitter wisdom. Thomas's eyes burned with warning as he muttered, "Hope gets you killed here." Eli answered, "Then better to die with it than live under their boots." Hale laughed, the sound echoing down the empty street, sharp and cruel. The narrator revealed how Samuel's lies had seeded division, forcing strangers to stand where brothers should have. Thomas's mind churned with memories of shared childhood with Samuel, now shattered into betrayal and greed. He gripped the handle of his revolver, though he did not draw, knowing one wrong move would light the fire of blood. The narrator told how the tension broke not in gunfire, but in silence, heavy enough to crush air itself. Hale leaned forward, speaking low so only Thomas could hear, "Your brother owns this town, and soon he'll own your grave." Thomas's eyes darkened, but his voice remained steady. "I'll see him before he buries me." Eli stood frozen, caught between admiration and fear. The townsfolk retreated, doors slamming as if shielding themselves from the storm brewing on the street. The narrator explained that betrayal was no longer a whisper but a roar. Samuel's shadow covered everything, and Thomas carried its weight like a man condemned. The narrator described Thomas entering the old church at the edge of town, where sunlight pierced broken-stained glass like shards of judgment. Samuel stood near the altar, his coat sharp, his face unreadable, a man cloaked in authority. Thomas whispered, "You still wear righteousness like a mask." Samuel smiled coldly, replying, "I wear what wins." The narrator revealed how once this church had been their refuge as boys, but now it served as the battleground of ideals. Samuel's words dripped with arrogance, while Thomas's silence spoke louder. Every memory of their shared youth turned weapon against him. The air thickened with betrayal, and the sacred place groaned under the weight of kin turned enemies. The narrator told how Samuel spoke with venom hidden in calm words. "You blame me, but it was your weakness that broke us." Thomas's voice, low and steady, replied, "A man can lose wealth, land, even life, but he can't lose his soul unless he gives it." Samuel's smirk widened, his silence dripping with contempt. The narrator explained that betrayal here was not loud, but sharpened like a knife with every pause. The once brothers stood divided, not by distance but by the gulf of choices made. The flicker of candlelight seemed to dance like mocking spirits around them, illuminating the truth. One brother was consumed by power, the other by loss. The narrator described how Eli slipped quietly into the back of the church, his eyes wide, realizing the truth of Samuel's corruption. He whispered, "Thomas was right, but the words carried a dangerous weight." Samuel's gaze darted to the shadows, smirk fading as he caught the boy's presence. Thomas stepped forward, voice sharp, "Leave him out of this, Sam." Samuel's reply carried menace. He chose his side the moment he stepped in. The narrator revealed how innocence was now tangled in blood, how youth was dragged into the pit carved by betrayal. Every stained glass shadow flickered like a prophecy of doom as the brothers stood on the edge of violence. The narrator told how the tension cracked when Samuel slammed his fist on the altar, the sound echoing like thunder. "This town is mine," he shouted, "and you're just a ghost wandering it." Thomas's voice cut back, sharp and bitter. "No, I'm the shadow that haunts you." Eli trembled, yet his eyes burned with resolve. The narrator explained how truth had split the room wide open. What once united blood now carved it apart like steel. Betrayal was no longer a secret, but a storm rolling over every word. Samuel's power filled the church, but Thomas's defiance carried the weight of justice denied for too long. The narrator described how silence fell again, broken only by the groan of the church's wooden beams. Samuel leaned close, voice sharp as glass. "You'll never have this land, nor the people, nor peace." Thomas answered, steady and grim, "I don't want what's yours. I'll take back what you stole." Eli clenched his fists, ready to defend Thomas, though fear trembled inside him. The narrator explained that the brothers stood not as kin, but as strangers locked in a war shaped by lies. In the broken church, betrayal was no longer whispered. It was declared, branded into the heart of family and town alike. The narrator described dusk falling heavy over the town as Samuel's men gathered in the saloon, their boots pounding the floor like drums of war. Thomas stepped inside, the lantern light stretching his shadow long across the room. A silence spread, thick and dangerous. Eli followed close behind, but his eyes betrayed the fear gnawing inside him. Thomas muttered, "This ends with truth or blood." Samuel's voice rose above the hush, cold and cruel. "Truth died when you chose exile." The narrator explained how betrayal twisted not only blood but loyalty, as the men who once called Thomas brother now eyed him like prey. Every card game, every drink shared in the past had been replaced with suspicion and venom. The air was ripe for violence, and every glance toward Thomas carried the weight of bullets waiting to fly. The narrator revealed how Samuel's men sneered, hands resting near pistols, waiting for a signal. Thomas's voice was sharp, "You've bought their loyalty with lies." Samuel leaned back in his chair, eyes gleaming. "Lies build empires, brother. Truth burns them down." Eli stepped forward, his youthful anger spilling. "You can't buy every man's soul." Laughter erupted, cruel and mocking, rolling through the saloon like thunder. The narrator explained that betrayal was no longer hidden in whispers. It was displayed boldly, celebrated like a trophy. Thomas's silence held more weight than words, his gaze burning into Samuel's, as though searching for any fragment of the boy he once knew. But all he found was ambition clothed in arrogance. The narrator told how the tension cracked when Eli reached for his revolver too fast, his inexperience betraying him. Gasps filled the room as steel flashed. Thomas's hand shot out, grabbing Eli's arm, growling, "Don't." Samuel smirked, savoring the boy's mistake. "See, brother," he said, "loyalty makes fools brave." The men's laughter cut sharp, and Eli's face burned with shame, yet his eyes still held fire. The narrator explained that Samuel thrived on turning loyalty into weakness, watching bonds strain under pressure. Thomas's grip on Eli was more than restraint. It was the desperate attempt of a man who knew innocence would not survive Samuel's game. Betrayal lingered, patient and cruel, like the smoke rising from every lantern. The narrator revealed how Samuel rose slowly from his chair, his presence commanding the room like a storm. He spoke, "I spared you once, brother, but mercy is wasted on men who refuse their place." Thomas's voice was steady, "You call betrayal mercy." The men shifted uneasily, the tension rising as the weight of Samuel's arrogance pressed down. Eli whispered, "They'll kill us," but Thomas only muttered, "Then let them try." The narrator described how Samuel's betrayal spread like a poison, turning every man in the room into an enemy by choice or fear. The saloon, once a place of laughter and whiskey, had become a battlefield waiting for the first spark to ignite. The narrator told how the room froze when Samuel gave a subtle nod, his men readying weapons. Thomas's revolver remained holstered, his eyes locked only on his brother's. "If you draw," Thomas said quietly, "make sure it's worth dying for." Samuel smirked, answering, "I never die, Thomas, I only take." Eli's breath caught, his young heart thundering against the silence. The narrator explained that betrayal had reached its breaking point, no longer an unseen cut, but a wound bleeding openly before all. In that moment, the line between blood and enemy disappeared. The saloon became a graveyard waiting to be claimed by whoever fired the first shot. The narrator described the night as heavy with storm clouds, lightning tearing across the sky as Samuel led Thomas into the sheriff's office. The room reeked of whiskey and secrets. Thomas's eyes narrowed when he saw papers strewn across the desk, deeds signed in Samuel's name. He muttered, "You stole more than land." Samuel's grin was venom. "I stole your life before you knew it was yours." The narrator explained that the betrayal ran deeper than property. It was family itself. Samuel spoke. "Our father left it all to me. You were never his son in blood." The words sliced through Thomas like steel. Eli gasped, his young face paling, the truth unraveling everything Thomas believed. The narrator told how Samuel savored his revelation, speaking with venomous calm. "You fought for a name that was never yours." Thomas's fists clenched, but his voice was low. "Blood or not, betrayal is still betrayal." Samuel leaned closer, eyes sharp. "You were a stray given mercy, and you repay it with defiance." Eli's voice cracked. "That makes you no brother at all." The narrator explained how Samuel's lies turned truth upside down, poisoning not just land and law, but Thomas's very identity. Betrayal no longer cut only through family, it cut through blood itself. Thomas stood, his rage silent, every muscle trembling like thunder waiting to break. The narrator revealed how Samuel opened a drawer, tossing an old silver locket onto the desk. Inside was a faded portrait of their mother, but only Samuel bore her features. "Proof," Samuel said coldly. Thomas stared at the locket, his heart tearing between disbelief and pain. He whispered, "All those years, every bond, every oath, built on lies." Eli stepped forward, fury overtaking fear. "You call yourself kin, but you're nothing but a thief." The narrator explained that this was the moment betrayal transformed into revelation, the truth shattering what little hope remained of blood unbroken. The storm outside cracked louder, echoing the fracture inside Thomas's soul. The narrator described how Samuel's men laughed cruelly outside, their loyalty built on stolen wealth. Samuel raised his voice. "Without blood, you are nothing. Without my mercy, you are dust." Thomas's reply was steady, though grief gripped him. Mercy twisted into chains is no gift. Eli shouted, "He's more a man without your blood than you'll ever be with it." The narrator explained that betrayal had reached its cruelest edge. Samuel no longer sought just control of land, but destruction of Thomas's very identity. The lantern's flame guttered, shadows clawing the walls like demons hungry for violence. The storm rattled the windows, a warning of what was to come. The narrator told how Thomas turned slowly, his voice like stone. "Blood never made us brothers, choice did. And you chose betrayal." Samuel's smirk faded, his arrogance cracking for the first time. Eli stood firm beside Thomas, his youthful courage hardening into resolve. The narrator explained how the storm outside broke into rain, pounding the earth like war drums. The truth had been revealed. Thomas's bloodline was false, but his purpose had never been clearer. Betrayal was no longer a wound, it was the fire that forged his resolve. The room's silence promised only one thing: blood would soon pay for blood. The narrator described dawn breaking hard over the town, the sky a pale canvas split by storm clouds. The street was empty, but for two brothers facing each other, the silence heavier than gunfire. Samuel smirked, hand resting on his revolver. "This is where it ends." Thomas's reply was calm, sharp. "No, this is where it begins." Eli stood at the edge, trembling, torn between fear and faith in Thomas. The narrator explained that every betrayal, every lie, had led to this, blood facing blood, though bound no longer by kin. The rising sun cast long shadows like graves, marking the dirt as the place where loyalty would die. The narrator revealed how the first step forward was slow, boots grinding against dirt like thunder rolling. Samuel's voice cut through the silence. "You were never worthy of my shadow." Thomas answered, "I was never meant to live in it." Eli's breath caught as he watched the space close between them, every heartbeat like a drum. The narrator explained that time seemed to bend, stretching each second as men prepared to decide fate with iron and fire. The townsfolk peeked from shuttered windows, knowing history was being carved into dust and blood. The silence was not peace. It was the storm's inhale. The narrator told how the storm broke when Samuel drew first, steel flashing in the dawn. The sound of the revolver cracked the silence, fire spitting from its barrel. Thomas moved with practiced speed, his revolver drawn like instinct, the shot ringing out. Eli shouted, ducking for cover, his heart hammering like the rain that began to fall. The narrator explained that this was no duel of skill alone, but of betrayal and resolve, of two paths carved by blood now clashing in steel. The world seemed to shrink to gunfire, dust and thunder, where only one man could walk away. The narrator described how the exchange tore through the street, bullets splintering wood and glass. Thomas staggered as a bullet grazed his arm, but his stance remained steady. Samuel advanced, eyes alight with fury, shouting, "I built this town on your weakness." Thomas roared back, "Then I'll tear it down with your lies." Eli scrambled forward, tossing Thomas a second revolver from the dirt, his youthful courage blazing through fear. The narrator explained that betrayal had reached its peak, no longer just words or secrets, but a storm of fire that threatened to consume all. The narrator revealed how time slowed in the final clash. Samuel aimed with deadly precision, his eyes burning with triumph. Thomas, battered but unbroken, steadied his breath, his revolver rising one last time. Eli shouted, "Now!" as thunder split the sky. The shots rang out, echoing across the valley. Samuel staggered, disbelief etched on his face as blood stained his coat. Thomas stood firm, chest heaving, revolver smoking. The narrator explained that betrayal had met its end in the same dust it was born, though the victory carried the weight of ashes. The street lay silent, save for the storm's weeping rain. The narrator described silence falling heavy over the street, broken only by the storm's fading rain. Samuel lay in the dirt, his revolver slipping from his hand, his breath shallow, eyes wide with disbelief. Thomas stood over him, chest rising with the weight of victory and grief alike. Samuel whispered, voice cracking, "You should have been nothing." Thomas answered softly, "And yet here I stand." The narrator explained that betrayal had consumed Samuel, leaving him a hollow shadow of kin. Eli hovered nearby, his young eyes filled with both horror and pride, knowing he had witnessed blood spill where brothers once stood. The narrator revealed how Samuel coughed, forcing bitter words past blood. "This town, mine," he gasped, his arrogance refusing to die. Thomas knelt, voice steady but filled with sorrow. "The town was never yours. It was theirs, and you bled it dry." The townsfolk crept slowly into the street, drawn by the sound of fallen pride. Eli's voice rang out, strong despite his youth, his lies end here. The narrator explained that the truth had finally pierced the silence of fear, and Samuel's power cracked like shattered glass. The outlaw's betrayal had lost its grip, and justice, though soaked in blood, had reclaimed its place. The narrator described how Samuel's last strength failed him, his eyes dimming as he whispered, "Blood makes no brothers." Thomas closed his eyes, whispering back, "No, choices do." Samuel's body slumped, his ambition fading into the dirt he had tried to claim. The townsfolk watched in silence, unsure whether to cheer or mourn. Eli placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder, saying, "You ended him, but you gave us back hope." The narrator explained that betrayal had taken everything, yet in the end, truth had been reclaimed by those who dared to face it. The storm had passed, but scars remained carved deep. The narrator told how the townsfolk slowly stepped forward, no longer hiding in fear. The bartender muttered, "It's done," his voice trembling. Thomas rose, mud clinging to his boots, revolver still heavy in his hand. He looked at the people, then turned away, saying only, "No man owns this land." Eli followed, his youthful face hardened by what he had seen. The narrator explained that the outlaw had brought not triumph but a harsh reminder that even justice costs blood. The street, once Samuel's kingdom of fear, now lay quiet, its silence holding both grief and relief in equal measure. The narrator described the final image of Thomas walking beyond the town's edge, the rising sun at his back. His steps were heavy, burdened not by defeat but by memory of blood spilled in betrayal. Eli called after him, "Where will you go?" Thomas paused, his voice quiet but resolute, "Where the past can't follow." The narrator explained that redemption and peace were never promised to men scarred by kin, but choice remained. The last image lingered, a man leaving behind graves, a boy carrying the lesson of betrayal, and a town breathing free again. The storm had ended, but the memory of brothers as strangers would never fade.